There's a man out there who doesn't fit the mold. The world labels him broken, strange, maybe even antisocial. Why? Because he lives by rules most people can't even understand. He's the one who turns down the invitation to another noisy Friday night, not out of shyness, but because he's building something that matters. He's the guy who doesn't flood social media with pictures of every coffee cup or every epic moment, because he doesn't need an audience to validate his existence. He's the man who doesn't panic when his phone dies, because he's not enslaved to constant stimulation. And here's the truth society doesn't want you to hear. This man isn't failing. He isn't lost. He isn't missing out. He's actually winning in ways that would terrify the average validation-hungry, dopamine-chasing person. Because while most people are drowning in the noise of endless notifications and empty conversations, he has discovered something priceless, something the majority will chase their entire lives and never truly hold: real power. Now, let me paint the picture of what we've been told is normal. Wake up, and the first thing you do? You grab your phone, check what strangers are doing, what celebrities are saying, what the algorithm thinks should matter to you. Every moment of silence must be filled. Music blasting during workouts, podcasts on every commute, TV humming in the background while you scroll endlessly through timelines. At work, chatter never stops. After work, plans need to be made. A weekend without company, a night without stimulation. That feels unbearable to most people. We've been conditioned to fear silence, to equate solitude with loneliness, to believe that if no one sees us, we don't even exist. And so, day after day, we run from ourselves, terrified of being left alone with our own thoughts. But here's where things get uncomfortable. What happens when someone opts out of that? What happens when a man strips away all the noise, all the desperate reaching for likes, all the shallow conversations and performative friendships? He comes face to face with something most people spend their whole lives avoiding: himself. And that, right there, is the reason society calls him dangerous. Because unlike the crowd, he knows who he is. Let's get brutally honest about the world we live in. We're drowning in noise, not just the literal noise of traffic, endless notifications and Netflix trailers screaming at us to watch now, but psychological noise. The noise of comparison, the noise of constant stimulation, the noise of other people's expectations echoing inside our heads. Think about it. Most people can't even sit in a quiet room without reaching for their phones. The second there's no distraction, they start twitching, scrolling, searching for something, anything, to fill the silence. Because silence feels like a void, and the void feels unbearable. Here's the script society handed us from the moment we were born. Wake up, immediately check what everyone else is doing, spend your commute consuming other people's opinions through podcasts, YouTube rants, talk shows, tweets. At work, surround yourself with chatter and small talk. After work, rush into plans so you're never left sitting alone. Then cap it all off by scrolling through social media until your eyes glaze over, desperately absorbing other people's highlight reels before you finally collapse into bed. And we call this normal. We call this staying connected. But let's call it what it really is: self-erasure. Every quiet moment is drowned in someone else's voice. Every thought is layered over with someone else's opinion. Every decision is influenced by what they will think, say, or post about us. We've created a culture where being busy is a badge of honor, where constant interaction is mistaken for true connection, where silence is labeled as awkward or antisocial. And here's the tragic part. Most people have gone so long without silence, they've forgotten what it feels like to actually hear their own mind. Ask yourself, when was the last time you sat in absolute silence, no phone, no music, no background noise, and just listened to your own thoughts? For many people, the answer is never. Or if they have, it felt uncomfortable, even terrifying. Because when the noise stops, the mask slips, the act is over, and all that's left is you, raw, unfiltered, unedited. That's the part most people run from, They'd rather binge 12 episodes of a show they don't even care about than spend 20 minutes alone in their own head. They'd rather scroll through the endless lives of strangers than take a real, unflinching look at their own. This is why society celebrates distraction. This is why we've built an economy out of keeping people endlessly entertained, endlessly stimulated, endlessly consuming. Because the second a man chooses silence, the second he refuses to drown in the noise, something terrifying happens. He begins to wake up, and once you wake up, you can't go back to sleep. Here's where things get real. What happens when someone decides to step out of the noise? What happens when a man refuses to measure his life by how many notifications he gets, how many likes he collects, or how busy his calendar looks? Something radical takes place. He discovers himself. And that, believe it or not, is the scariest thing in the world for most people. Because here's the truth. Most of us don't actually know who we are. We only know the version of ourselves that has been shaped, marketed, and molded by others. The version that chases approval. The version that's terrified of being excluded. The version that performs every day like life is one long audition. But the man who embraces solitude, he breaks that cycle. He looks at the constant chase for attention and says, enough. Not with bitterness, not with depression, but with clarity. He sees through the illusion. He sees that most people are living by scripts they didn't even write. Scripts handed down by corporations, by social expectations, by influencers who don't even know their names. We are like actors trapped in a role, forgetting the difference between the performance and the truth. But the man who chooses solitude refuses to play along. He tears up the script. He chooses silence over applause, authenticity over performance, freedom over conformity. And this is exactly why society fears him. Because you cannot control a man who doesn't need your validation. You cannot manipulate someone who has already made peace with himself. You cannot sell false happiness to someone who has already found it within. While the crowd is busy numbing their anxiety with endless consumption, he's sitting quietly, clear, focused, untouchable. While others panic at the thought of being alone, he thrives in it. And in that quiet, he finds something the world desperately tries to hide from us: real power. The power of a mind that isn't constantly hijacked. The power of emotions that aren't dependent on approval. The power of being whole, even when no one else is watching. Arthur Schopenhauer said it best: a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. That line hits harder today than ever, because when the crowd drowns you out, you can't hear yourself. But in solitude, the mask falls away, and the real self finally speaks. Most people find that idea terrifying. But the man who embraces solitude, he finds it liberating. And that's why he's not just surviving, he's dangerous to a system built on insecurity and powerful in ways most people will never experience. Long before social media existed, long before we were hooked on endless feeds and dopamine loops, great thinkers already knew the truth about solitude. They saw what we're only just starting to realize, that silence isn't empty. It's where the real answers live. Take Schopenhauer. He didn't need Instagram to see the problem. He said, a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. Think about that. The second we step into the crowd, we start performing. We shift, we edit, we filter ourselves. We become actors playing a role, trying to fit a script. But when we strip the crowd away, when it's just us and our thoughts, that's the only time we're truly authentic. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who had the weight of an empire on his shoulders, understood this too. He wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." That wasn't just poetry, it was survival. He knew that external chaos will always exist, but the man who can retreat inward and find stillness there is untouchable. Fast forward to Carl Jung. Jung introduced the concept of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we try to bury, deny, or pretend don't exist. Most people spend their whole lives running from those hidden parts. That's why they fill every moment with noise, because silence forces them to face their own reflection. But Jung revealed something revolutionary. If you sit with those shadows, if you integrate them, you become whole. And wholeness is power. Then there's Nietzsche, who dropped the hammer. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Most people never find their why because they're too busy chasing approval, likes, and shallow pleasures. But solitude forces you to confront that question head on. What actually matters to me? What is worth suffering for? The man who embraces solitude finds his why, and once you have that, you become unstoppable. These thinkers lived in different times, spoke different languages, and faced different struggles, but they all landed on the same truth. The path to real power runs through solitude. And here's the part most people miss. This isn't about rejecting society or hating people or becoming a hermit. It's about reclaiming yourself. It's about building a foundation so strong that when the noise of the world gets loud, and it always will, you don't crumble. The man who loves solitude isn't antisocial. He's anti-bullshit. He's not hiding from the world. He's preparing himself to walk through it with clarity, with strength, with authenticity. That's why he stands out without even trying. Because while most people are fragments, half themselves online, half themselves in public, never truly whole, he's integrated, he's real, and that kind of presence is magnetic. Here's the part society always gets wrong. They look at the man who spends time alone and assume he's doing nothing. They think he's wasting away, disconnected, maybe even broken. But they couldn't be more wrong. While the crowd is busy consuming, scrolling drama, gossip, distractions, he's creating. He's not numbing himself with noise. He's sharpening his mind. He's reading, learning, practicing. He's developing real skills while others develop addictions. He's having deep conversations with himself while others chase shallow approval from people who barely know them. Here's the kicker. He's not doing this to prove a point. He's not sitting there thinking, I'll show them. He doesn't need to, because this isn't performance, it's practice. Quiet, relentless practice that compounds over time. And when the world finally sees him, when his work, his skills, his wisdom, his calm presence come to light, people act shocked. Where did this come from? When did he get so good? How did he become so solid? The answer is simple. While others were performing, he was building. This is the power of silence. In solitude, there's no audience to impress, no scoreboard to chase, just the discipline of becoming better every single day. And the best part, he doesn't even announce it. No progress updates, no fishing for compliments, he just builds. And that's why when his results show up in his work, his relationships, his character, they feel undeniable. They carry the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to be seen while he was grinding. Most people are renting their peace from others, borrowing their worth from likes, leasing their happiness from relationships that could vanish tomorrow. But the man who embraces solitude, he owns his peace. He's not dependent on the crowd to define him, and that makes him dangerous in the best possible way. Section 6. Relationships and connection, rewritten plus compressed. Now let's tackle the paradox most people can't wrap their heads around. Society looks at the man who embraces solitude and assumes he must be cold, detached, maybe even incapable of love. But here's the twist. His relationships are often deeper, stronger, and more authentic than anyone else's. Why? Because he doesn't need them. Most people drag their insecurities into every interaction. They're chasing validation, approval, and constant reassurance. They show up to relationships half complete, hoping the other person will fill the holes in their identity. That's why so many connections today feel fragile, shallow, and transactional. But the man who has made peace with himself isn't bringing that neediness to the table. He doesn't cling, he doesn't perform, he doesn't manipulate just to be liked. Instead, he brings something rare, his whole, authentic self. That changes everything. When he cares about someone, they know it's real. When he commits, they know it's solid, because it's not born out of desperation, it's born out of choice, and choice is infinitely more powerful than need. Here's the paradox. The man who needs relationships the least often ends up with the best ones. Why? Because people are drawn to wholeness. They're drawn to authenticity. They're drawn to the kind of grounded energy that says, I'm here because I want to be, not because I'll collapse without you. This makes him dangerous, not in a destructive way, but in a liberating way. Dangerous to industries built on insecurity. Dangerous to the idea that you need someone else to complete you. Dangerous to the narrative that being alone is a weakness. He's proof that the healthiest relationships come not from emptiness, but from fullness. And that's exactly why the people who do get close to him often experience something rare in today's world, a connection that actually matters. Here's a truth most people never realize. Real leaders aren't forged in crowds, they're forged in solitude. Think about the so-called leaders we see today. Many of them are just loud voices with big platforms echoing whatever the crowd wants to hear. Their strength depends on constant applause. Take away the audience, and they collapse. That's not leadership, that's performance. But the man who embraces solitude, he doesn't need the crowd to validate him. He's already tested himself in the quiet. He's already wrestled with his fears, his doubts, his weaknesses, and he's still standing. That inner clarity is what makes him unshakable. Marcus Aurelius, leading the Roman Empire through war and plague, knew this. He wrote to himself in his journals, reminding himself daily that real power comes from mastering your own mind, not from controlling others. Solitude gave him that strength. And the same applies today. If you can't lead yourself in silence, you'll never truly lead others in chaos. Leadership isn't about barking orders. It's not about forcing people to follow. It's about embodying something so authentic, so centered, that people naturally want to align with it. And that kind of presence can only come from within. Most people are fragmented. Half of their identity is borrowed from social media, the other half from the expectations of friends, family, or co-workers. They're pulled in every direction, never fully whole. But the man who spends time alone, he's integrated. He knows his strengths. He knows his flaws. He's not afraid of them because he's faced them head on. And that makes him someone others can actually trust. This is why solitude has always been tied to wisdom. The Buddha found it alone under a tree. Jesus retreated into the desert. Muhammad sought his first revelations in a cave. Were they antisocial? Number they understood something deeper, that truth can't be found in the noise of the crowd. It can only be found in silence. And here's what makes the man who loves solitude so powerful. He doesn't chase leadership. He doesn't crave followers. He doesn't need control. Yet people sense his strength, his steadiness, his freedom, and they gravitate toward it. That's real leadership, the kind that doesn't demand attention, but commands respect. In a world addicted to noise and performance, the man who has mastered solitude becomes a living reminder of what's possible. And that's why society quietly fears him, because he shows us that true freedom doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from mastering yourself. Here's something most people overlook. Solitude doesn't just clear your head. It transforms your entire being. When a man steps away from the constant chaos, something shifts. His nervous system begins to relax. His energy, once scattered across endless interactions and obligations, starts to return to him. He stops leaking power into every conversation, every argument, every distraction, and in that stillness he begins to glow with a different kind of presence. You've seen it before. That person who walks into a room and doesn't have to say much, but you can feel something about them. Calm, centered, unshakable. That's not an accident. That's the byproduct of someone who has cultivated peace in solitude. The crowd thinks strength comes from noise, shouting, posturing, dominating. But real strength is quiet. It's steady. It's the man who has sat alone with his fears, his doubts, his demons, and made peace with them. The man who has touched that stillness within himself is radiating something money can't buy and the system can't sell. And here's the spiritual side most people miss. Solitude reconnects you to something greater. Call it God, call it the universe, call it the soul. It doesn't matter the name. Every major spiritual tradition has pointed to this. Buddha found enlightenment under a tree, alone. Jesus heard the voice of God in the desert, alone. Muhammad received revelation in a cave, alone. The pattern is too obvious to ignore. Truth doesn't reveal itself in the middle of a crowd screaming for attention. It shows up in silence. This is why the man who loves solitude is dangerous to a society built on distraction. He doesn't need constant entertainment to feel alive. He doesn't need validation to feel worthy. He doesn't need rituals, gurus, or institutions to access peace. He's found it in the most radical place possible, in himself. And that changes everything. His body thrives because he's not running on stress. His spirit thrives because he's aligned with his own truth. His mind thrives because it's no longer hijacked by noise. He's not just surviving, he's optimized. Mentally, physically, spiritually. While everyone else is draining themselves, chasing things outside of them, he's building energy from within. And when you have that kind of energy, steady, calm, rooted, you become untouchable. Now, let's cut through the comfort. Most people hearing this will nod their heads, maybe even feel inspired for a moment, and then go right back to drowning in the noise, back to scrolling, back to chasing attention, back to running from themselves. And that's exactly why society stays the way it is. Because facing yourself in solitude is the one thing almost no one has the courage to do. The truth is brutal. You've been programmed to fear silence, conditioned to believe that being alone means being broken, taught to chase validation like oxygen. And as long as you keep playing that game, you'll stay trapped, controlled, consumed. But here's the challenge. You don't have to stay there. The door out has always been open. You just refuse to walk through it. The man who loves solitude isn't superhuman. He didn't get lucky. He made a choice. A choice to stop running, a choice to stop performing, a choice to sit in silence and face the parts of himself that the world told him to bury. And on the other side of that pain, that discomfort, that terrifying stillness, he found freedom. That freedom is available to you too. But let's be honest, most of you won't take it. Most of you will keep numbing yourselves, keep leasing your happiness from strangers online, keep living someone else's script until the day you die wondering why life never felt real. But a few will take this seriously. A few will test what happens when the noise stops. A few will sit in the silence long enough to meet the person you've been avoiding your whole life, your true self. And when you do, you'll understand the secret. You'll understand why the man who loves solitude isn't weak, isn't broken, isn't strange. He's powerful, untouchable, free. The question is, are you brave enough to join him?